My name is Samuel Ballin. I'm a PhD candidate at Radboud University at the Centre for Migration Law, and I'm just going to quickly re-record and recap the major points from the presentation that I gave in September for the Believe It or Not conference organised by Striking Sirens and COC. And the topic of the presentation is the construction, particularly of gender identity, but more generally the construction of identity in queer asylum claims, and what this means for the relationship between queer theory, queer politics, and refugee law. Just to say, the presentation is based on an article that I published last year, 2023, in the Australian Feminist Law Journal. So if there's anything in this presentation that is of interest or that raises any questions for you, you can read a little bit more detail there, and yeah, it should be fairly easy to find and to access. And if you have any more questions, or if you're interested to discuss any of these points with me, please do. I'm always very happy to receive emails from strangers, and my email address will be on the final slide of the presentation. So the structure of the presentation is in 4 parts. To begin with, I go through I recap the kind of legal framework, the relevant legal framework. So Article 1A of the Refugee Convention and the meaning of the particular social group within the refugee definition. Then I come to the what I call the 4 challenges and the double movement, so the 4 and the 2 of my title. And this is based on the work of Judith Butler, and I derive four challenges or problems or tensions within refugee law to be addressed. Then the 3 of my titles, so the third part also of my presentation, I look at the 3 ways in particular that identity is constructed or is described in the McM case. And this was the first case in the UK where somebody was recognized as a refugee on the basis of non-binary gender. And as you see, that was a 2020 case, so relatively recent still. And finally, I try to sort of tie all this together and see what it means for the particular social group, for the queering of refugee law. And just to say, so with the visuals, I have a little visual code here. The image you see on the screen now, I kind of use to represent, or I like to think of it as representing a sort of queer approach to identity. So yeah, it's a jigsaw. I won't describe it in too much detail, but then to contrast the image you see here, I use or I like to think of this as representing a much more kind of legal and strict and sort of simplified idea of identity. And this image actually is taken from, I think, the Ministry of Justice of the UK, or possibly the Home Office, the Ministry of the Interior, that they put up during Pride Month a few years ago. So Article 1A is the kind of basic definition of a refugee in international law, and this is the key part of this for my presentation and for my article is that refugee law does not protect all forms of harm or all forms of persecution. It only protects persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. And typically in cases relating to marginalized sexual orientations and gender identities, membership of a particular social group has been the ground that was applied. So for me, it's really important and interesting to try to understand what membership of a particular social group actually means in these cases. What is the particular social group that marginalized sexual orientation and gender identities constitute, or that queer people belong to, and on the basis of which they are persecuted. One of the reasons, more generally, why this is an interesting ground, an interesting place to look in the law, is because it is often described as the most kind of evolutive, the most unclear ground. So it's not exactly a catch-all, but compared to race, religion, nationality, or political opinion, it's often seen to be the ground that can then sort of scoop up and include other people who should be entitled to international protection, should be entitled to recognition as refugees, but who don't fit those other categories. On the one hand, there's this sort of I know it when I see it approach. On the other hand, there is, of course, as always in law, a need for sort of clear rules, certainty, predictability, consistency. And so the rules that have typically been applied to construct the particular social group or to define it have been this idea of cognizability or social perception. So if a group is recognized by wider society as being a group, as being distinct, then it is a group. And also immutability. So regardless of kind of social perception, regardless of being recognized as a distinct group in wider society, if a group shares a sort of immutable protected characteristic, something that can't be changed or would be unconscionable to require people to change, then that can also be recognized as a particular social group in refugee law. And you can see already, I think, that either of these or both of these definitions could apply to sexual orientations and gender identities in many cases. There's also an and construction. So in some jurisdictions, in some legal contexts, they require both cognizability and immutability. So you need to be perceived and also share an immutable characteristic. And in other, and this is the view that the construction that the UNHCR favors, other jurisdictions apply an either or test. So it doesn't need to be cognizable, it doesn't need to be immutable, but it can be either or. So if you're a cognizable group, you don't need to share an immutable characteristic. If you share an immutable characteristic, you do not need to be a cognizable group. There are also intersectional and post-categorical approaches to the construction of a particular social group, which I think I won't get into too much in this short presentation, but I do discuss a little bit more in the article. So the 4 challenges, and this is sort of my own invention. This is my own addition, but I do derive it from a text or a particular quote from Judith Butler, where they say, to ameliorate and rework this violence, it is necessary to learn a double movement, to invoke the category and hence provisionally to institute an identity, and at the same time to open the category as a site of permanent political contest. So they recognize a sort of tension here between the need to invoke a category, so what I call the need for recognition, and that's both that's both group recognition, so recognition of a category, and individual recognition as a member of the category. But that is in tension with the need for a kind of, or sometimes in tension with the need to institute an identity, meaning a kind of accurate representation of oneself, or the risk of misrepresentation of one's actual identity. So if you fit a category, but that category does not actually correspond or relate very closely or very accurately to your identity, that's a first tension. Secondly, in any case, these categories, these identities, should be permanently politically contested. So yeah, the challenge of reification or de-reification. And yeah, I think this goes sort of to the core of many understandings of what kind of constitutes queer analysis, queer theory, queer politics, that it's not so much about creating or asserting these kind of stable categories or these stable identities, but rather challenging them and of deconstructing them. And finally, the inseparability of all of these challenges of the invocation of a category, the institution of identity, from the violence itself. And you can take as a kind of a very obvious, I think, example of this, the origin of queer itself as a term. So this, of course, is a reappropriated slur. And also in the case of asylum law, we're only engaging in this process in order to respond to persecution or threat of persecution. So the McSam case, just to give you a little bit of background to the case, the claimant had previously applied for refugee status as then self-describing, self-defining as a gay man. They come from El Salvador. And so it was as a gay man that they left El Salvador. It was as a gay man that they first applied for asylum in the UK and were rejected. They had then been in the UK some time and had been had time to kind of reevaluate or reconsider how they thought of themselves, how they saw themselves, and then they reapplied for asylum as a non-binary person. And on the basis of that identity, they were again rejected by the first-tier tribunal, but then on appeal, they were recognized as a non-binary refugee by the upper tribunal. The upper tribunal describes their identity in 3 very different ways. So at some point, it describes them as quite straightforwardly as non-binary. So we can see there a sort of example of the category, maybe also of instituting an identity. They also describe them as a member of the wider LGBTI community. I think there are a lot of questions. There's a lot been written, a lot been discussed about what is the wider LGBTI community. Is that because, of course, in this case, it's really significant to know that they were rejected on the basis of being gay. So it's not just because they were LGBT that they were recognized as a refugee, but it's specifically their place within that community. But still, the tribunal constructs the particular social group around this wider LGBTI community. And again, there's a lot written about what is it that lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transgender people of all different stripes, intersex people, other queer people, what actually asexual people, what is it that if anything that these groups have in common, if not this response to violence, if that's not the only thing. And in the article, I explain a little bit more why the response to violence is not enough to constitute a particular social group in law. And the third identity, or the third way their identity is constructed or described, is simply as visibly other. Now, this, in some ways, is the most problematic. Visibly other to what, other from what, but also in some ways is the most flexible. You can see in each of these 3 identities, all 4 of the challenges being kind of in tension. None of them none of them resolves any of the challenges. I think the challenges are not resolvable. Maybe I should have said that, but you do see, the tension between them, the balance between them playing out differently at different stages in the decision, which is interesting. And finally, on the point of reification or non-reification of an identity, I think it's really significant that in this person's life trajectory, even in their legal trajectory, they have presented as a gay man, self-defined as a gay man, and later self-defined as non-binary. During the case, if I remember correctly, they used a they/them pronoun, but also said they were happy to use a she/her pronoun in some situations. I could be misremembering that latter part, but the point is that the identity that they presented during the asylum procedure is not necessarily a final or the true self, but is a snapshot at a particular moment in this person's life. And that is something that the law is very bad, or refugee law is very bad at recognizing. It really requires you to say, this is who I am, this is who I have been, this is who I will be, and that's the basis on which protection is granted or not. But that doesn't, I think, map onto how many of us experience or understand identity and our own lives. So how does all this map together? Yeah, this is the part where I go a little bit off script. I don't have something in particular to say here. I think there are a lot. Yeah, so you can see there's a need for clarity. There's a need for saying something that the law is able to recognize in order to escape violence, escape persecution, in order to present a clear, intelligible category that can also then be used by future claimants. But there's also risks that come with that. There's also harms that come with that. And in my article, what I don't really do is suggest what is the best solution, or should we go hard on defining a really clear legal category that can be used by non-binary claimants or by other trans and gender non-conforming claimants. I also don't suggest that we need to avoid that, need to resist that, because I think that presents really significant risks for individual claimants. And I don't think in any case that if we have to choose between non-binary, wider LGBTI community, or visibly other, to take 3 examples, one of these is the perfect category to choose, and one of them is the lesser option, the worst option. Instead, I borrow a concept from Jana Wessels, this idea of productive instability, and suggest that we need to strategically alternate and use whatever strategies might work to keep the law unsettled, to keep the law in tension, and to keep the tension between these four challenges in kind of perpetually open. So I think that is where I'll leave it. And as I say, if you're interested, you can read more, or feel free to send me an email. My email is here on the screen. Thank you.